Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name is Ross, and as always told, I had a voice radio. So today, we're going to be looking at a rather exciting new Sylveon card that could be, to put it bluntly, incredibly good. Not unlike the Sylveon GX, with which we've been playing for a little while now. Now, this has been revealed and translated by the lovely Autobot Tesla, and it's a fairy Pokemon. Being a fairy Pokemon is alright. It means that you do get access to Fairy Garden, which is quite nice to give yourself free retreat. You also have access to Fairy Drop to do a little bit of healing, and of course, you are hitting weakness against stuff like Dialga, which, if the draft I did the other day is any indication, is about to become a very good card indeed. Now, along with this, you do have a weakness to metal, which could be quite bad with all the new metal stuff coming out in the near future. But then again, you've only actually got 90 HP, so weakness is not going to be the end of the world here. Resistance to darkness is kind of nice, especially with Zoroark running rampant. Although, because of your low HP, a Zoroark with a full bench will still get a one-hit KO. Sorry about that. A retreat cost of 1 is very nice, especially considering that you are going to be using the single energy attack most of all, so this is rather convenient. Now, I do need to mention very quickly at the beginning that as with all of these evolutions, Pokemon that evolve from Eevee, you do have access to the Sun and Moon Eevee with Energy Evolution. You can actually get this Sylveon up on turn 1 of the game by attaching a Fairy Energy to Eevee, using the Energy Evolution ability, and then getting a turn 1 Sylveon. This is a game changer, and because it came out in Sun and Moon, we can expect it will be legal in the format until at least September 2019. This is wonderful. This is always something we need to bear in mind with these Pokemon that evolve from Eevee. So the first and by far best attack on this Sylveon, for 1 colourless energy, look at your opponent's hand, choose a supporter you find there and discard it. Use that supporter as this attack. Grab a supporter from your opponent's hand, chuck it in the discard, but use a supporter as this attack. It's a free supporter and it's disruption. Now, first of all, this should remind older players of a couple of cards. First of all, this does sound a little bit like Smeargle's Portrait. Portrait basically said, look at your opponent's hand and use one of the supporters you find there. Key differences between this and Smeargle. Smeargle was an ability, so you could, for instance, use stuff like Switch to use multiple Smeargles in a single turn. And secondly, Smeargle left the supporter in your opponent's hand, whereas Sylveon gets rid of it. This is wonderful, because if your opponent only has one supporter in their hand, then you're basically going to leave them with nothing. So there's a few different angles to this, but let's start off with the disruption angle. This is wonderful. We saw a card like Torment Spray. Now, I am not actually saying you should use this. That is very bad. Was translated in English as Tormenting Spray, I should say. Choose a random card from your opponent's hand. If it's a supporter, discard it. And it wasn't very good because the chances of it being a supporter were pretty bad. You really had to pull off some kind of combo with Delinquent to get your opponent's hand down to a single card, and then play this hoping they'd kept a supporter. This is really, really good, and let's not forget, and I do need to stress this, single energy attack on a Pokemon that evolves from Eevee means that you can use this going second on your very first turn. Your opponent will get a turn because you can attack going first, but then after that you can just discard this and you are off and rolling, and it is brilliant. Yay! Now, there's always a chance that your opponent has a Tapu Lele in hand that they're going to use to search out a supporter, or maybe they've got an Ultra Ball that they're going to use to search out a Tapu Lele to search out a supporter. But unless they've got something like that, you could really put your opponent behind a couple of turns. Getting rid of your opponent's supporters is brilliant. Tormenting Spray was never destined to be good because it was way too situational. This is different. The disruption angle of this is absolutely phenomenal, and it could turn games. If you hit your opponent's only supporter and they have nothing else, you could win the game because your opponent draws nothing and loses. That in and of itself is pretty gosh darn nice. Now, the other element of this is the fact that you get to use an extra supporter. Now, we did see this with Sableye, the other card along with Smeargle this might remind you of, with Impersonate, which for 0 energy allowed you to discard a supporter from your deck and then use it as the attack. Now, that did give you the choice of supporter from any in your deck, but it was also incredibly handy because if you didn't have very much at the beginning of the game, it gave you that extra level of consistency to help you set up. And that's the other thing we need to mention here. Maybe your opponent's got a supporter, but you don't. This is brilliant because it means that you are going to be in a great position because you then have a supporter as long as your opponent does. I mean, one brilliant thing about this, just as a little side note, we do occasionally see your opponent playing a Tapu Lele to grab a supporter a turn early. Maybe they're playing a Zoroark deck, they need an extra bench Pokemon to take the KO. So what they do is they bench the Tapu Lele, even though they'd rather wait a turn, so they can get the KO and not waste Wonder Tag. Well, if they do that here, brilliant, because then you can discard it with Sylveon and they've wasted it. It means if they have to bench that Tapu Lele to get a KO with Zoroark, they're going to have to either search it out and risk it getting discarded, or not search it out, and either way, you're in a really good position. Now, anyone that played Smeargle in the past will know that this can backfire quite spectacularly. Now, back then it was Professor Juniper, nowadays it's Professor Sycamore, but they are literally the same card with a different name. I lost a game at Worlds in 2012 because I got a little bit overly officious with my Smeargle and just had to Juniper too many times. I didn't have enough energy to finish out the game. That is a genuine risk here with Professor Sycamore. The other risk here is, of course, that your opponent might have an N, which means that both players shuffle their hand into their deck and draw a new number of cards equal to the number of prizes they have remaining. Well, that could be great for your opponent. That could essentially give your opponent an extra supporter during the turn, which is a real problem because you're basically adding consistency to your opponent's deck. Right now, this is great for disruption. But in terms of hitting supporters, by far the two most played supporters are Professor Sycamore and N, and either of those could backfire spectacularly. Professor Sycamore could force you to discard cards you really don't want to, and there is no choice. If you hit a Sycamore, you've got to play the Sycamore. That was the issue back with Smeargle. And N could just give your opponent an extra supporter for free. That's a bit of an issue. Now, there's always a chance you do hit something like a Team Flare Grunt, and then that's going to be amazing to disrupt your opponent. Or maybe you hit something like a Team Rocket's Handiwork, and then you actually discard a bunch of cards by flipping heads, but it's going to be few and far between. But let's for a moment jump forward to after rotation. We assume, and I think it's a very fair assumption, check my video on the rotation prediction for this, that we are going to have a Sun and Moon on rotation when we hit September. At which point, you are going to be losing Professor Sycamore. And you are going to be losing N. So as it stands at the moment, and there's more cards to be revealed, so maybe this will change, but as it stands at the moment, we're all going to be playing Cynthia, which is kind of like a one-sided N for 6. Now, ladies and gentlemen, now we are absolutely talking. This is going to be a lot different, and to be frank, a lot better. Because now you're going to be hitting stuff like Cynthia, and it's going to be absolutely wonderful. You're going to be discarding your opponent's Cynthia, which is going to hurt them. Remember, Versus Seeker isn't in the format at the moment. And you're going to be getting a really good supporter that doesn't help your opponent and doesn't hinder you. Ladies and gentlemen, I am quite frankly excited about this. It's a great attack. It's going to see play. Now, the second attack here, we're not going to spend much time. 40 damage for 2 energy. I suppose you can use a counter energy, but to be completely blunt, if you really want a Pokemon that attacks for 2 energy that's a fairy type, you're probably better off with the new Dedenne. Check my video about that. I think Dedenne could be fun. This isn't an attacker, it's a setup Pokemon. But when you combine it with the Energy Evolution Eevee, the fact that we're already playing Sylveon GX, so this could just be a 1-card tech, I think this could be a really good card. So I'm going to be giving it 4 Wassies. But as always, ladies and gentlemen, I want to hear from you guys. Let me know in the comment section. Go nuts. Be nice. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at the Wossy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and so on, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio and do check out my video game channel, Wossy Plays. But by far the most important thing, as always, is to look after yourselves until next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.